Thank you, Christian. Yeah, so I'll, about myself a little bit. I've been on TC39 for 10 years now, which sounds really long when I say it. The original reason I joined was because I was maintaining the ES5 shim and ES6 shim, which were a collection of polyfills for those language features. A lot of people really wanted to use array map in Internet Explorer 6 through 8, for example, and ES5 shim is how you do it. And I had to kind of know how the specification worked in order to implement the polyfill correctly. So that's how I got my start. Currently, I work at a company called Hero Devs, one of the OpenJS Foundation members. We sell long-term support on open source projects. So my boss would be unhappy if I didn't mention, if any of your employers have open source projects in their stack that are no longer supported by their maintainers, we can help you support them. So my talk today is about the lifecycle of a TC39 proposal. So first, I'm going to give sort of a brief overview of what TC39 is, because a lot of people have no idea. So the TC stands for Technical Committee. The standards body is ECMA, which used to be the European Computer Manufacturers Association, but just like KFC, now they're just the acronym. There's a lot of standards in ECMA, that not just JavaScript. JSON is in there, OpenOffice XML, Dart, C#. TC53 that was mentioned is like for standards for wearable technology. There's all sorts of stuff in there, but JavaScript is probably the most, has the most cachet out of the whole list. So members, there's lots of members. They include browsers like Google, Apple, and Mozilla. Microsoft used to be in this list, but they don't have a browser anymore. Companies with websites in general, right? So I have Microsoft, Facebook, Shopify, Sony, Bloomberg, Salesforce, GoDaddy. Hero Devs is a member. There's a long list of members on their website. That link goes to it. So the way it works is that member companies, which includes the OpenJS Foundation, can send delegates. So just they pick who they want to send and they send them. Or the committee can also invite somebody as an invited expert. So for example, there's a lot of folks who, like there's a new task group in TC39 to deal with source maps, to try and come up with standards for that. And there's a bunch of folks that came in as invited experts for that because they know a lot about source maps and weren't already in the room. So we want to bring in the experts, and that invited experts is how that's done. That's also how I've been able to participate when I'm between jobs, because I get to be brought in as an invited expert on the proposals I'm championing, for example. So the meeting schedule, this has changed over the course of COVID and so on, but now it's 6 times a year. 3 of them are kind of in person with a remote option, and 3 of them are fully remote. And we do 3 8-hour days and 4 5-hour days, depending on what kind of meeting it is, so it's a lot. I generally block off the whole week just because there's extra stuff to talk about, and also I don't really want to deal with anything else when I have to deal with all that. So a brief history here. 1995 is when, I think a lot of folks do know this part. Brendan Eich released JavaScript inside Netscape. 96, a year later, Netscape submitted it to ECMA as a standard. And in 97 was the first version of the standard, ES1. 98 was ES2. 99 is when ES3 came out. This is when, before this point, JavaScript didn't have try-catch. It didn't have regular expressions. I don't even know if it had function declarations. Like, there's a lot of stuff it didn't have. ES3 is the JavaScript that most people, even the really, really veteran and experienced JavaScript developers, are familiar with. No one really remembers JavaScript much before that. 2000, 2008, I called this the ES4 dark times. So everyone was working really hard on trying to come up with a new version of JavaScript. Adobe was a really big player because they wanted essentially ActionScript to be JavaScript. And basically the, what's the word I'm looking for? Lots of drama. Talks fell apart, and ES4 never happened. And so ActionScript 3 is my understanding is that ActionScript 3 is actually what ES4 would have been, more or less. So if you've ever been a Flash developer, that may be familiar. But in 2009, everything sort of, the schism was healed to some degree, and ES5 came out, and ES5 won in 2011. 2015 was a really big year. So it was ES6, and this included arrow functions, the class syntax. It included promises and maps and sets and a ton of other things. I've always liked JavaScript, but there's a lot of folks who say JavaScript was terrible until ES6 and then it became usable. What that shows at least is that the new features that were added are very appreciated and beloved. And that's a good thing. After 2015, though, the committee changed its process. Before that, it was just a bunch of people in a room arguing, and when they'd agree on something, it would go in a big Word document. And then when they all felt like it was ready, they'd stamp it and say, this is an addition. That felt a little too flimsy and kind of, especially with ES4, right? Like they wanted a little more predictability and a little more organization around how proposals advance. So we adopted a new process as of, post ES6, ES 2015. We decided there was going to be an addition of the spec every year. Just whatever happened to be in it would make it. Hasn't yet been a year without a new feature, but maybe that'll happen one day. And we also moved to GitHub, so we don't have to track changes in a Word doc anymore. We get to do it on GitHub. It is much nicer, believe me. So now I want to talk about the process. So we have this link here to our process document. It describes all the stages. For each stage, there's entrance criteria, what you have to do to get into it, what each stage sort of means, what it means that a proposal is stage whatever, what sort of changes you should expect while it's in that stage, and then what kinds of implementations you might expect. And so proposals require a champion. A champion is one or more people who are eligible to participate in meetings. In other words, delegates or invited experts. And that's basically someone who's responsible for driving the proposal forward. They're not the only ones who do work on it, but they're usually the ones who present it. They're the ones who kind of poke people and be like, hey, I need your answer. Like, I need your thoughts. Like, what do you think about this? They're the ones who have to do the coordination between people who have conflicting constraints. And TC39 operates on consensus. So a lot of, often when you get into a group, you'll see a model like voting. Majority wins, or 2/3 or something. Or it's a company. Whatever your boss tells you to do is what you have to do. And that's who settles your arguments. Consensus means every single person has to agree or at least not object. So what this means is that every feature that is in JavaScript, 0 people objected to it being in the language, in that form. That doesn't mean everyone's happy about it. Sometimes people are grumbling but quiet. Sometimes people make a point of putting dissent in the notes, like their Supreme Court justice with their dissenting opinion, but they're not willing to say, I block this thing, or I want to withhold consensus for this item. Considering that the browsers, at least on the web, are unilaterally in charge of what gets shipped, you could imagine that they could abuse that power and say, no, we don't like it, go to hell. But thankfully, they participate in the community. It's a bit of a game theory dance, right, about who wants to use which browser and public opinion and all those things, but it makes for a nice détente where everybody's different constraints, even people who aren't in a position to control what gets shipped, get considered. And so I really value that even if one person in the room has a problem, that person might be representing 100,000 people. But there's only one person in the room to represent them. And hopefully it's more than one, right? Generally, you want an argument to be persuasive enough that you don't have a lone holdout. But it's still really important that we don't kind of steamroll over the constraints that are represented by somebody in the room, even if it's just one person. So consensus is very important. It's frustrating at times. There are a number of folks on the committee who wish we didn't have full consensus, who want a sort of lighter form where 1 or 2 lone holdouts isn't enough to block something. Maybe that will change in the future, but it would require consensus to do so. So the source of truth for proposals and what stage they're on, effectively it's whatever the committee's decided, but it's documented in this proposals repository. I happen to be the one who manages the GitHub presence for TC39, but you can go there and look, and it'll tell you which proposals are what. And that's actually an outdated notes link, but it'll redirect. So you can also read the notes 1 to 3 weeks after each meeting, the notes are published publicly, and you can go look through them. It takes time for everyone to review them and make sure they didn't say anything embarrassing or weren't misquoted or something. OK, the first stage in the process, stage 0. I call this the I've got a crazy idea stage. Technically, there's no requirements to be in stage 0, which means if you got an idea for JavaScript, it's stage 0. Congratulations. But in practice, that is not practical and isn't how we really think about it. So typically, we kind of don't really treat it as stage 0 unless it has a TC39 champion and it's either been presented or going to be presented, meaning it's on an agenda, and that's when we would put it on the proposals list, is when it meets one of those criteria. There's currently 15 proposals at this stage. It's typically, if something is still stage 0, it means the committee is pretty thoroughly unconvinced that it's worth spending time solving the problem. Because stage 1, maybe this idea isn't so crazy, specifically it means we want to spend more time thinking about the problem. So a proposal, you might think of a proposal as like async await. That's actually not the proposal. That's the solution. The problem was, how do we ergonomically work with promises and defer things to happen when a promise is resolved, right? So all of the proposals, they tend to become known by their solution, but they are supposed to start out as a problem. And that's what stage 1 is. OK, yes, please bring this idea back. We want to spend more of this group's time thinking about this problem, reviewing possible solutions, talking about it. You ideally have a suggested solution. You don't have to come in there and be like, help me figure it out. But usually the important thing is that you get the committee on the same page about what you're trying to solve, because then they'll understand why that's a good solution. Or if it's not a good solution for some reasons, they'll understand what maybe a better solution might be. So it's sort of a strategy to kind of get yourself to help your proposal get more people to suggest things that might work, is if you phrase the problem in a way that they can understand. So you have to have a really good grasp of the landscape in order to do this. You have to know what's out there. You have to know what the other proposals are talking about, how your proposal might conflict with other things, what the various frameworks are doing, or various engines are doing, or various browsers are doing. It can often take a lot of effort to go from here, and that's why there are 96 proposals right now in that list. Some of them for very many years. I just, like 2 meetings ago, pulled a proposal out of stage 1 to stage 2 after 9 years. Yeah, it felt really nice, but I had sort of given up the ghost on it, and someone suggested I bring it back, and it's advanced, which is great. But not everything will advance from here. Stage 2, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, you have a question.
Yeah, do you have repeats or deja vu? Do you have proposals like they popped up, they kind of went away, and then a couple years later they come back?
People will often suggest ideas. So we used to have a mailing list called ES Discuss. Now we have a discourse forum it's like ES Discourse. And people will often suggest ideas that have been suggested a dozen times before. Typically, someone who's putting something on the agenda for the committee will, perhaps for social pressure reasons, will have done the research to figure out if it's a new idea or not. And you're expected to know about prior art, past attempts to propose it, but also how it's been done in other languages and so on. So that's part of the burden of being a champion, is that you need to kind of do your research and really become an expert on the problem you're trying to solve. So when something is stage 2, that sort of means that the committee thinks this might be the best solution to the problem. In order to be here, you have to have your initial specification text and all major semantics addressed. So I put that in quotes because there's a number of things in the process document that are vague kind of on purpose, and it makes us all debate every now and then about what constitutes major, for example. But like, if it's syntax, you have to describe the grammar so that the people who think about how JavaScript is parsed can call out if there's a major problem. Sometimes a syntax just can't happen because there's tricky things like, is a slash a division symbol, or is it the start of a regular expression? There's like a lot of things like that that you shouldn't ever have to think about unless you're trying to change the syntax. But thankfully, some people think about, not me. Because I'm not very good about the syntax stuff, because like otherwise it wouldn't be implementable. No one would be able to ship it. when something's stage 2, this has an expectation that the feature will eventually make it in, but it's not a guarantee. Proposals have stalled here and have died here. Probably the most famous one is object.observe. It was in stage 2 for a long time, and then it ended up getting withdrawn. So there will not be an object.observe. So in stage 2, you can make a polyfill or write a Babel transform or something and test out a proposal. But please, I'm begging you, don't ever use a stage 2 proposal or under or less in production. Okay, one of the biggest precepts of the web and JavaScript is don't break the web. So what this means is that if a website is out there doing something that works, that thing should work forever. The typical example is this original Space Jam movie website. It's wonderful that the new Space Jam movie website actually keeps a link to the original up in the corner. That was like our prototypical, that website has to work forever because it was one of the first websites built with JavaScript. But if you ship something on your website when it's stage 2, and then we go to change it, and then a browser tries to ship it, your website might break in that browser, and you could argue, well, that's that's the developer's fault. They screwed up, but that's not how the market pressures work. The people who are hurt by that are the users of the website, and the browsers want to be the one the users pick. So they're not going to make a decision that gets people pissed at them, even if it's a web developer that put them in that position. So essentially, if something has ever worked, with some exceptions, it will always work. So there's 23 proposals right now in stage 2. So we actually just added a new stage at the beginning of this year. We did 2.7 because it's more than 2, closer to 3, but it's not 3. The reason to do this, we basically pulled these requirements back from stage 3. And I'll explain why when I get to the stage 3 stage. But what stage 2.7 means is it's time to write tests. So test 262 is our official conformance test suite. All the browsers and engines run them against their own implementation. And it's a way to kind of make sure that you don't have any bugs. And often when an engine finds a bug, a regression test for that bug, they will submit one to test 262, and then the other browsers run against it, and everyone kind of makes sure that it's working. If you do implement, as an engine, if you're a browser or something, if you implement a proposal that's 2.7, you should do it behind a flag. Don't expose it by default. This is the time to make sure you can ship it, but don't actually ship it. We don't expect any changes here unless there's something that's surfaced by testing or validation. But for example, the temporal proposal is stage 3, but it's been stage 3 for 3 to 4 years, maybe more. And arguably, it should have been 2.7 the entire time, but we didn't have that stage until recently. And that's because temporal's not ready to use yet. There's still been changes because it's such a big proposal that until people start implementing it and testing it out, you can't really know how well it's working. And that's what this stage is meant to do, is to kind of suss out those problems before it gets shipped on the web and we can't take it back. There's 3 proposals that are currently in there, including the one that I mentioned that was in stage 1 for 9 years. I'm hoping to move it to stage 3 at the next meeting. So stage 3, and the reason why the 3 is sort of important is for people who do pay attention to this, 3 means it's safe. Try it out. Use it in production. Most browsers will ship here. I think Safari is the only browser that's a little more conservative and will tend to wait until it's stage 4. But Chrome ships stuff that's in stage 3 very frequently, as does Firefox. So changes are only expected in stage 3 when there's new feedback that we could have only come up with from actually shipping it or using it, at scale. So if something's in stage 3 and you're just like, I don't like the name of that thing, can it be this other name? That's not really a change that we're going to consider, because even if it was a better name, because it's kind of too late. Stage 3 means it's done. There are special cases, but it would have to be really extreme to convince people that it's worth making a trivial change like that we could have made earlier at this late stage. There's 16 proposals currently in that list. And then the last one, stage 4, this is sort of symbolic. At this point, JavaScript is a living standard, which means that if you want to see what's in the spec, you don't have to go to ECMA's website and download a PDF from whichever year you care about. Just go see what is on our GitHub Pages site, and that's the spec. And in order to be stage 4, a proposal has to be shipped somewhere. The wording in there is, it's the vaguest and most debated part of the process, significant in the field experience with shipping implementations, such as that provided by 2 independent VMs, virtual machines. So such as is the part we argue about all the time. But everyone agrees that 2 browsers, unflagged, qualifies for sure. And the reason is because there's lots of different risk factors, right? Like web compatibility is an issue. You may have heard about smoosh map. There was the array flat and flat map methods. Originally, they were going to be flatten, I think. And then MooTools is a library that was very popular 12, 14 years ago, and did something that at the time we all thought was fine. It modified array prototype. It like put a method on arrays called flatten so that you could just write .flatten in your own application. So convenient, right? But it turns out that websites that have shipped this break when the browsers try to ship it. So there was one thing that we almost couldn't ship. I forget exactly what it was, because the Lego website was using some old version of a library that then conflicted with the new feature, and we had to like pull back the feature. Chrome like pulled back the feature, and we had to wait and see if we could get a hold of someone there and they could fix it. Luckily they did, and we were able to move forward again. But that type of thing like really can torpedo the standards process and cause names to change. It was also the same with the string contains function became includes in ES6 for the same reason. MooTools is often it was like the first one to think of this great idea, which at the time everyone loved. It's just now we know, good intentions are a great road paver. So there are now 58 proposals since ES6, since ES 2015, and I've mapped out how many were in each year. There's already 2 in ES 2025, which won't come out until next June. So like that's just how fast we move, right? We cut, ES 2024 is approved in June of 2024, but like we produced the final artifact in March. So, and then sent it to ECMA for review. And then there's like a patent opt-out period where like for legal reasons, companies have the chance to be like, no, actually we patented something that we put in the spec. Nobody's ever exercised it, but it's there just in case, because ECMA provides a royalty-free patent grant. So that means that if you use something that's in an ECMA spec, you can be assured that no one can ever sue you for patent reasons for using it. So that's why there's like the delay. But a bunch of standards have a bunch of like legal boilerplate kind of nonsense occasionally. But yeah, so there's a lot of these proposals. I think like 7 or 8 of them are things that I've championed. I keep an exact count on my LinkedIn for funsies. But you can certainly go look through the list. Yes?
Can you please champion decorators to move to next?
So decorators is actually stage 3 now. It took a long time to get there. But it is stage 3. It has a champion. It is being implemented, but it is a complex proposal. And so it will probably take a little time to be implemented. But the design is pretty final. So unless browsers, while implementing it, come up with something that they couldn't have figured out otherwise, decorators are going to happen. It's just about when, how, you can't speak for their like Google or Mozilla or Apple's like roadmap and prioritization and budget, but that's the only thing holding it back at this point. But I did try to help with the decorators proposal every now and then, and not everyone is happy about that proposal, so I didn't put that on the slide. But it's really hard to make something everyone likes. That's okay. Okay, so proposals can have different characteristics. For example, if it's a new API, does it offer new capabilities, a thing you can't do otherwise? Like, for example, weak map or weak set or weak ref or finalization registry. All of those things deal with garbage collection and whether something is strongly held in memory or not. That's a new capability. And that's not syntax, that's API. It's a function, it's like a JavaScript function. But like you can't do that in userland. You can't polyfill that, not properly anyway. So that sort of makes it more valuable if it's a new capability. That's a really strong reason to add it. You can't do this you can't do the thing you need to do without the proposal. Sometimes it's new helpers. It's like new convenience methods, right? We just added object.groupBy and map.groupBy. That's like, I guarantee you, if you all go look through your code bases, you'll find like 12 places where you can refactor a loop, a for loop or a for each loop or whatever, where you're building up an object of shit based on like some key that you've derived from the value, and you'll just convert that to the object.groupBy call, right? It's very useful, but it's not a new capability. It doesn't offer any performance benefit, but it's a convenience. It's a huge convenience because everyone needs to use it sometime. So when I say new primitives, I'm talking about like conceptually, like a promise. That's a new primitive. It's not a primitive JavaScript value. It's an object, but like it's like an atom. It's something that you're going to think about as, in an object-oriented code base, like one of your classes it might be an atom that you just kind of, that's a thing that you pass around. That's what I'm talking about there. There also could be web compatibility risk. So at this point, it's very likely that there will never again be new array.prototype methods, because literally every time we go to add one, some website breaks because of MooTools or SugarJS or whatever. Pick a thing. There's something like that. So we have to think about that with proposals. I also championed the global this proposal. I don't like that name, but it was the least trash name that didn't break websites. And I wanted something, so we got it. I ended up getting a whole bunch of angry people on the proposal repo because they thought it was a terrible name, and they didn't like the way that I went about my decision process, and I'm a terrible person, and so on. I ended up working with another delegate to write a very long document of like shoulds and musts, and then which names were aced out by each of these categories, and everyone quieted down. So my lesson that I learned from there was explain yourself thoroughly in writing in advance as early as possible, and I try to do that now, and I still have a lot of work to do. The other thing, so I mentioned performance briefly earlier, like if it's something that you could write yourself, but you're probably going to do it in a way that's not very fast, and we can do it in a way that's really fast and guarantee that, that's a reason to add something. And similarly, correctness. Is it easy to screw it up? Maybe we should do it for you, right? So you have similar things for if you wanted to add new syntax. Is it a new capability, or is it just fun little sugar? Are there any interoperability pitfalls, meaning like what happens if you use this syntax with every other operator and syntax in the language and every other type of thing in the language? How does that all work together? What programmer intuition? Sometimes people come from other languages. Some of those languages are designed well. Many of them, not so much. But they still inform, and that includes JavaScript at times in both of those categories. And that informs people's intuition, what you're going to expect. Like the thing that you might expect if you've never programmed before is probably going to be a lot better of a thing than the thing you might expect if you're used to other programming languages. But we have to kind of thread that gap between like how do we make something that programmers aren't going to be like, what the hell is this? That's supposed to mean this thing and it means that thing. And also kind of is sensible and intuitive for newcomers. It's a hard problem to solve, and there's actually another task group that in TC39 that is trying to explore kind of how we standardize languages, and that includes user research on like ergonomics and stuff. There's not really a good answer for that now, but and that's led by an individual at the University of Bergen, and they're trying to come up with a better answer for that. Another one is how does it reduce the very small design space? So if you think about all the operators in JavaScript, there's not that many left that are just one token. And there's not even that many that are two. There is like, and then if you look at what words can be operators, maybe there's a bunch, but there's some grammar questions. Maybe there's none. Like, so every time you add syntax, you're closing something off to ever be used for something else. So the bar for adding new syntax is pretty high. And then the performance and correctness benefits I talked about with API, same with syntax. Is it easy to screw up, or is it hard to do fast? Those are good reasons to add it to the language. Okay, so you should get involved. Proposals take a lot of work, and most of us are volunteers, even those of us who do it for work. Like, I'm lucky enough that for the last couple jobs, I've been able to negotiate the meeting time as like paid time to do that. Not everyone is able to do that, and I work on TC39 stuff way more than my work officially pays me to do. And I'm one of the luckier ones. So like there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And you can help. There's lots of ways. You can jump onto repos. You can offer use cases. I mean, you could go through that list of stage 2 proposals and try and change the design before it gets locked in. You could go that list of stage 1 proposals and try and figure out how you can like give it a nudge and get it back in circulation, right? Just do whatever you can, and as long as you're like not a jerk about it, you're welcome, right? Just be nice, and it's fine. So that's the talk. I'm happy to take questions. That link is the link for the slides, so if you want to get to all the, I didn't put a QR code yet, but if you want to get to all the other clickable things throughout it, you can go there. You can find me on all the places, and please, instead of giving me your own money for sponsoring, which I'm sure you are all going to do, get your employers to sponsor me, because if you type npm fund in your company's code base, even if my name isn't in there, which I doubt, there will be names in there. Give those people money, because they are the kind of silent people that are, like that XKCD comic. They're that one guy in Nebraska maintaining your whole stack. So please convince your company to do it. They have far deeper pockets than any of us, and I feel much better about taking their money than anyone else's. So.
How does that work? So, like, for instance, you have Google and all these guys who are part of these, conversations happening. So then, if Google were to sponsor it, is there no conflict of interest of, hey, why is?
No, I mean, first of all, to avoid a conflict of interest, all you have to do is disclose it. Okay. But also, so a lot of the proposals are driven by companies like Igalia and Boku, or the last two I can think of, that are funded by some of these other companies. For example, let's see, Temporal is being partially funded by Bloomberg through Igalia. And the decimal proposal, which may or may not be able to keep going, but that is being heavily funded by Bloomberg, because Bloomberg uses JavaScript for their stock tickers and terminals and stuff. They use a lot of JavaScript, and they really want a better way to represent numbers accurately for money reasons. So, so they're paying a lot of money to try and get a solution for that. So, and then as far as sponsoring, that's more about like open source stuff and less about TC39. You're certainly welcome to sponsor me or anyone else for TC39 work, but I think that it's much easier to get companies to pony up for that kind of work than it is to get them to compensate open source maintainers for the open source they use. So I'm pushing more on that angle, but obviously any money you can extract from companies and give to people who need it is a good thing. Cool. Yeah?
I have kind of a silly question. You talked about how you push these proposals forward.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kill them off? You have all these 93 that are stuck. Is there a process to kill them off?
Yeah, we actually just, 2 meetings ago, we just kind of started a little mini audit and went through the list of stage 1 proposals, and I think 3 of them ended up getting withdrawn. Essentially, to kill off a proposal, it has to either get to a point where it's pretty obvious to everyone there's no way it's going to advance, or where nobody wants to do it anymore. And yeah, and if no one wants to champion it, and nobody else wants to step in and keep it alive, then we can move it to the inactive list. We can always move it back if we need to. Yeah, and I mean, of those 90-some, right, like, I bet a number of them are good candidates for being withdrawn or like not, inactive proposals, but we haven't, sometimes there's value in making numbers smaller, but sometimes it doesn't really matter. But it's more, the benefit of auditing them is more to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks and less about cleaning up. But that's the process, is we just sort of roughly agree in the room that like no one else wants to champion it, and it just gets moved to the other list.
So I have a question. For that process of stage 1 and how it moves to stage 4, what's the minimum amount of time and the maximum amount of time that you're saying?
That's a good question. So the question was like, what's the time frame for moving through the stages? There's no explicit requirement or maximum or minimum. The fastest I've ever seen is one proposal go directly to stage 3 from nothing, which was catch, without bindings. Like, you used to be able to, you'd have to do catch with parens and a thing, and now you can just do catch in a curly brace, right? So that one was sort of like, it's such a big problem. Everyone understands why it's a problem. It's such an obvious solution. There's no other way it can be done. There's no problems here. Like, and it moved, but that's the fastest.
How fast was that?
Like in one meeting, in the same meeting it was brought up, it went straight to stage 3. That is the fastest. I think of the next 5 fastest, I've got 4 of them.
What you're saying is pretty much browser adoption, right?
That's when browsers start shipping it. Yep.
Give it to me. Okay.
Yep. But yeah, and then but I'd say people generally are uncomfortable with something advancing past stage 1 in more than a meeting, like, or within the same meeting. So it's like the proposal I brought up to stage 2 after 9 years in January. I was also asking for 2.7. I was like let's try and do both, right? And folks were like, let's slow it down a little bit. It can take a little more time. And so I waited a whole meeting before I asked for the next one. And similarly, even though it's not going to have any changes, I'm going to wait a whole meeting until the next one, which is in May, I think. And I'm going to try and go to 3 in that meeting. So the comfort level everyone really has is 1 stage per meeting, but sometimes things jump.
And these are set dates for submissions, so it would be like, hey, here's a deadline.
Yeah, the meetings are scheduled in advance, and we have a requirement that that anything that's not on the agenda 10 days in advance of the meeting, someone can object simply for the reason of there's not been enough time to review it. So it's not a hard deadline. You can get something in if something comes up, but like procedurally, anyone can just be like, come back next time, you didn't give me enough time to review it. Yes?
Do these standards for new features, let's pick something like map,
Mm-hmm.
does it also dictate the performance characteristics of the implementation to, like, say, yes, this has to be 001?
Usually it does not, but map and set in particular are one of the few things that do dictate performance characteristics. Yeah, all the others they sort of effectively dictate them by their algorithm in the specification, but that one hasn't. Those have an explicit note that say that it has to increase sublinearly, which doesn't necessarily mean O of 1, but it means O of n is not acceptable. So you can polyfill it in a way that's better than O of n, but you can't polyfill it in a way that's O of 1.
But is it part of the standard, though, to say the implementation, like in general,
Yes.
implementation must meet these performance characteristics?
Yeah, anything that we agree to go in there as a normative requirement, that's just the terminology we use, that's part of the spec. And so we can put performance in there. We can put, like, there's stuff about the memory model when it talks about the weakly held things. And then there's stuff about the multi-threading stuff when it talks with atomics. They're still not multi-threading, but like atomics opens the door to doing that. And so like anything that we feel like we can lock down, we generally try to. Because anything that's not specified is at risk of being the worst possible implementation is going to be on the web, and then we're stuck with it.
Right.
So.
And browsers do it differently, though there's a competitive need to
Yes.
be as fast as possible. But as data structures or more formal things that you might see in Java come into the language, it's pretty important
Yeah.
to the world that they be apples and apples.
And the engine, which are not all browsers, so that's why I'm saying engine, but the engine implementers in the room are very strict with to make sure that proposals are going to be implementable in a way that is optimizable and performant because of that exact concern. And actually, one of the engine implementers in the room is from a company called Moddable, who makes a tiny little chip that runs JavaScript. So it's not like, like this, like there's JavaScript in the TVs, but this is an even smaller chip that you could put in, like, I don't know, a watch or something. And so they're also heavily sensitive to, like, they put a lot of things in ROM and not RAM. And so they are very aware of performance there because they have to think about, like, is this something we can put in ROM, which is cheap, versus something, so there's a lot of complex things that different folks in the room apply.
Things can, like, be jitted down to compiled code and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it depends on the implementation and what optimizations they apply. And also the way that engines optimize is very different. So some things are insanely faster in Safari than everything else. And some things are faster in Chrome than everything else. Some things are faster in Firefox than everything else. Like, because they all have taken different approaches to try and optimize JavaScript and to do sort of just-in-time compilation and fast paths. So, and I'm sure that Bun is coming up with their own new ways of doing things as well, because they're very, focused on speed. And so that would be their priority, is how they can do it fast. So maybe we'll learn something from that. Yeah.
So obviously there's like a lot of stakeholders, right? Companies and community members.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of curious, like how do you prioritize, or who really prioritizes like what actually ends up, making it all the way through? Like, is it the most broadest impact, or?
Well, because of the consensus model, like it's really not the way in which we do that is when you put something on the agenda. A number of years ago, we were running into this sort of problem, and so we decided to create a time box system. So you self-select how much time you're going to limit yourself to, and that includes everyone's arguing. And at the end of that time, it's the next person's turn. So that has helped make things more efficient. And it also means that if you haven't gotten your point across or people haven't agreed, you don't get to advance that time. So, and if you don't want a time box, you don't have to put one, but then they stick you at the end if we have time for it. So that's sort of the game theory approach there, is like, figure out how to make your presentation efficient if you want guaranteed, discussion time. And the only time you can do stage advancements is during the plenary meeting, like during the actual meeting. So if you miss your shot, you got to wait 2 more months. All right. Thank you, everyone. How are you?